Welcome back to the deep dive. I hope you're ready to get comfortable, maybe light a candle, because today we are taking a trip back in time.
A very specific trip.
Yes, very specific. We're heading to a chilly Monday evening in Elmira, New York. The date is November 22, 1965.
And that date, it really sits right in the middle of a very intense period of experimentation for Jane and Rob.
It really does.
Yeah.
We're looking at session 210 of the early sessions, book 5 of the Seth material. And, I mean, this session is it's a beast. It's got everything.
It really does.
It's equal parts, a ghost story, a medical thriller, a scientific failure, and then it turns into almost a school comedy at the end. It's wild.
That is a very, very accurate summary. It runs the gamut of human emotion, doesn't it? You have this chilling, sort of comforting visitation.
Right.
Then the profound weight of a cancer diagnosis, which is just so heavy.
Well, yeah.
Then the embarrassment of a botched psychic test.
Total flop.
And then somehow, bizarrely, a spirit guide is giving out a report card and talking about holiday leave. It's just, you couldn't make it up.
You really couldn't. And before we really get into this, and we are going to unpack every single layer, I do need to share our standard disclaimer. This deep dive is distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes.
And we are, of course, exploring the archives here, specifically the material published by the New Awareness Network.
We always want to point you back to the source. The analysis we're doing, it's the map, but it's not the territory. There's really nothing like reading the raw transcripts for yourself.
Absolutely. You can find them at sethcenter.com/the early sessions.
That's sethcenter.com/the early sessions.
So, okay, let's set the scene. It's 1965. We are in the living room of Jane Roberts and her husband, Robert Butts.
Or Rupert and Joseph, as Seth calls them. Exactly. And it's important to remember, these aren't gurus on a mountaintop. There are a couple, in upstate New York, just trying to figure out why the wife, Jane, goes into a trance and starts speaking in this completely different voice.
They're basically testing the boundaries of reality right there in their own living room. And on this particular night, those boundaries get tested in a way that I think makes everyone involved pretty uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable is definitely the word. So let's get into the narrative arc here. The session notes say it's 8:30 p.m. The actual trance hasn't started yet. Jane and Robert are just, hanging out, but they have visitors.
Right. Their landlady, a woman named Marian, she drops by, and she brings a friend with her, a woman named Helen Dyer.
And you can just tell from Robert Butt's notes, and he was always so meticulous with his notes, that the vibe in the room was heavy right from the very beginning.
It was. And there was a specific reason for that.
What was going on with Helen?
Helen's husband had just recently died, lung cancer. So it was very fresh. She was in that raw, exposed state of grief. And while they're all just sitting there before any trance happens, she starts telling Jane about an experience she had.
This is the ghost story part of the evening, right?
It is, but it's not what you'd think. It sort of defies the genre. It's not a spooky story in the traditional sense. It's not chains rattling in the attic or cold spots in the hallway.
So what was it?
Helen tells Jane that while she was sleeping, she felt her husband. She insists, she's quite adamant, that it wasn't a dream. She felt him speaking to her.
And how did she describe that feeling? Because the words she used, they really struck me.
She said the experience was simple, reassuring, and clear.
Simple, reassuring, and clear. I mean, that is just such a contrast to how we usually dramatize the afterlife in, movies or books.
Exactly. We expect cryptic riddles or, dark warnings or some kind of dramatic fanfare.
Yeah, big booming voice. But she just felt reassurance.
And that specific emotional texture, that simple comfort, it really sets the tone for everything that happens next. Because Marian and Helen, they don't actually stay for the session itself.
Right, they leave.
They leave at 8:55 p.m. The door closes. Jane and Robert are alone. And almost immediately, the session begins. Jane goes into her trance. Seth comes through, and he doesn't do a warm-up. He doesn't say hello. He goes right after the women who just walked out the door.
He says, and I'm quoting from the notes here, "I find myself following the two women who have just left here."
Which is, if you think about it for a second, it's a little unnerving.
It is.
The idea that this consciousness can just, drift out the door and tail your guests down the street like a metaphysical private eye.
It's very film noir.
Yeah.
But he validates Helen's experience, doesn't he?
He does. And this is so crucial, not just for the skeptics in the audience, but for Jane and Robert at the time. Seth confirms that what Helen felt, it wasn't just some grief-induced hallucination. He says the husband is actually there. He's present.
I have the quote right here, Seth says. She will have several other such experiences, for her husband is aware of the situation. If she accepts the help on an intuitive basis, it will indeed change the course of her life.
Change the course of her life. I mean, stop and think about that. That is a massive statement.
It is. It totally reframes the grieving process. It's not just about getting over it or moving on.
No.
It implies an active, ongoing relationship with the deceased that can actually steer your future.
Exactly. Seth is saying that the husband is offering help, not just comfort, but like tactical, intuitive help to navigate her life going forward.
But, and this is the big catch, isn't it?
It is. It's a huge but. That help is contingent on her accepting it.
She has to trust her intuition.
Right. If she writes it off as, oh, that was just a dream, or it was just my imagination running wild, she effectively closes the door. She blocks the signal, you know?
So we have this really beautiful validating moment. The husband is okay. He's watching over her. Everything feels sweet.
Mm-hmm.
And then the session just takes a nosedive.
A very sharp, very dark turn.
Seth pivots from this comforting message about the husband to something incredibly heavy about Helen herself. He says, I pick up an incipient malignancy. I believe in the abdomen.
And this is where we really have to pause and look at the language Seth uses. He's so precise. He doesn't just say, she has cancer.
No.
He calls it an incipient malignancy.
Okay, so let's unpack that word, incipient. I actually looked this up just to be sure on the nuance. It means in an initial stage, beginning to happen or develop.
Right, which means it is not fixed yet. It's not a solid thing in the way we think of a tumor on an X-ray film. It's a process that is just starting. It's fluid.
And Seth really elaborates on this idea of fluidity. He says the condition is balanced. He says, and I quote, at this point, the condition could retreat and disappear, or it could develop into cancerous globules.
And that right there, that's the core of the Seth philosophy on health, all in one sentence.
It really is.
We tend to think of illness as something that just attacks us from the outside, you know, like a lightning strike or a mechanical failure that just happens.
Right, like your car breaking down.
Exactly. But Seth is saying the physical manifestation is dynamic. It can go forward, or it can actually go backward.
So what's the deciding factor? What makes it grow into a tumor or shrink away into nothing?
Or inner climate.
The inner climate.
Yes. Seth uses this incredible image. He says she is balanced on a thin line of normalcy. Just think about that image. A tightrope walker.
Wow.
On one side is health. On the other side is the disease. And what's the thing that could push her off the rope?
Her emotions.
Specifically, he says, despair and self-destructive tendencies.
He says despair and self-destructive tendencies can so alter the chemical composition that a malignant tumor could develop.
And you have to remember, this is 1965.
Right.
The idea that your emotional state could literally alter your chemical composition to the point of creating cancer.
Yeah.
That was not mainstream medicine, not at all.
No way.
Today, we talk about cortisol. We know about the immune system and how stress affects it. But Seth is drawing a direct causal line. Despair becomes biology.
It's a terrifying concept, though, in a way, because it puts a lot of responsibility on the patient.
It does. It completely removes the victim narrative. It says your biology is listening to your psychology constantly. If your psychology is screaming despair, your biology starts building the physical structures that match that frequency.
So this creates the dilemma. And for me, this is the most fascinating and, frankly, the most difficult part of this entire deep dive.
I agree.
You're Jane and Robert. You're sitting there in your living room. Seth just told you that your friend, your landlady's friend who lives down the street, has an incipient tumor. But
yeah,
he also told you that it hasn't fully formed yet. It could still go away.
Right. You are holding this terrible secret.
So the logical thing to do, the heroic thing that we're all trained to do, is to run down the street, knock on her door, and say, Helen, you have to go to a doctor immediately. We think you might have a tumor.
That's what every movie would tell you to do, right? Save her, warn her, intervene.
But Seth says, absolutely not. Do not do that.
He is incredibly strict about this. He says, under no circumstances should this information I have given you be passed on to the woman involved.
Under no circumstances. That feels, I don't know, harsh, maybe even negligent from a certain point of view.
It feels harsh if you're looking at it from a conventional medical perspective where the only tools you have are, surgery or drugs.
Okay.
But look at it from the metaphysical or the psychological perspective that Seth is operating from. He argues that telling her would immediately involve the negative suggestion that could lead easily to the very condition that we hope she avoids.
Oh, I see. So if they go and tell her, hey, you might have cancer, her immediate reaction is panic. Despair.
And that despair creates the exact chemical environment that causes the incipient malignancy to grow, to become a full-blown tumor.
Wow, so the very act of warning her would actually seal her fate. It would make it happen.
Exactly. It raises this massive, massive ethical question about precognition and medical intuition. Sometimes the most ethical thing you can do is to remain silent about the bad news.
And focus on the good news.
Which brings us right back to her dead husband.
Right.
Seth says the help she really needs isn't a medical diagnosis from some medium down the street. It's the personal contact she feels with her late husband. That comfort, that reassurance is what's keeping her on the normal side of that thin line.
So by encouraging her to listen to her husband's voice, by validating that experience, they're essentially prescribing the cure without ever mentioning the disease.
That is a beautiful way to put it. It's about reinforcing the positive, life-affirming force rather than validating the fear of death.
It really makes you think about how we handle bad news in our own lives, doesn't it? Even without any psychic powers involved. How often does our attempt to warn someone just paralyze them with fear?
It's the observer effect from quantum physics, but applied to biology. The act of observing the potential for illness and then verbalizing it might be the very thing that collapses the wave function into illness.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting for me. Just in terms of the mechanics of how Jane even does this.
Yeah.
Seth takes a moment to mention why Jane or Rupert needs these visitors in the first place.
Right. Because clearly, from Seth's point of view, it's a bit of a distraction. He says he gets impatient when there are too many witnesses around because he wants to get back to the deep work with just Robert.
But he admits it's necessary. He calls it direct laboratory experience.
Yes. Jane needs to learn the difference between what he calls a valid perception and just a subjective feeling.
So having a stranger like Helen in the room is like a pep quiz for her.
Exactly.
If Jane gets a feeling about Helen and then Seth comes through and confirms it, Jane learns, okay, that specific internal feeling, that texture, that equals truth.
Precisely. It calibrates her internal instrument. Seth says she instinctively feels that she is thereby learning to manipulate and use these abilities. It's her training ground.
Speaking of abilities and the deep mechanics of reality, there's this brief, slightly abstract section where Seth talks about primaries. Did you catch that?
I did. It's a bit cryptic, but very, very Seth. It's one of those little nuggets he drops in.
He says, talking represents a primary, the primary of communication. Walking represents a primary, the primary of motion.
It seems so simple on the surface, right? Of course we talk, we walk. But I think Seth is challenging them to look at these basic human actions as like fundamental universal principles.
It's almost like he's saying that communication and motion are basic elements, like carbon or oxygen are elements, and talking or walking are just the way those elements manifest in our physical world.
Correct. And he hints that there are many, many more of these primaries that they'll need to figure out eventually. It's a reminder that while they're dealing with these intense personal dramas like Helen's health, they're also supposed to be mapping the fundamental physics of the universe.
But even with all this cosmic knowledge, things can still go horribly wrong.
Yeah.
Which leads us to the very human part of the episode, the flop.
The absolute total failure of the envelope test.
So for listeners who might not be familiar, Robert Butts would often test Jane's ability by sealing an object or a piece of paper in a sealed double envelope. And Jane, in a trance as Seth, would try to describe what was inside.
It's a pretty standard parapsychology test, very much in the style of the old Rhine experiment.
So Robert hands her the envelope. Inside is an insurance slip for Jane's manuscript. Pretty boring, factual, black and white stuff.
And Jane does not see an insurance slip.
Not even close. She starts describing a mist.
She even spells it out, M-I-S-T.
Yeah. Then she describes a long road, dark treetops, a picnic table.
Oh.
And very, very specifically, she sees photographs.
And she gets really specific about these photos, too. She sees one of herself as a younger woman in a tree in California. She sees another one of her and Robert at a picnic table in a glen in New York.
So Rob is sitting there. He's holding an envelope with a boring insurance slip in it. And Jane is off on this reverie about California and picnic tables. It's a zero, a complete miss.
On the surface, yes, a total failure. But the analysis of why she missed is the real gold nugget of the whole session, I think.
Because she wasn't just making up random stuff, was she?
Not at all. Those photos she described, they were real. They actually existed. They were real photographs from their past.
So she was seeing correctly. She was just seeing the wrong thing.
Or maybe the wrong time.
Ah. What was the block?
Seth explains it beautifully later in the session. He says Jane was shocked by the earlier information.
A cancer diagnosis.
Exactly. Just imagine the psychological weight of that for a moment. You just look at a woman, a friend, and saw a potential tumor inside her. That is a heavy, scary thing to process.
Oh, she just got scared.
She got scared. And subconsciously, her mind just put up a wall. She blocked any further deep information because the last piece of deep info she got was just too traumatic.
So where did her consciousness go instead?
It retreated into her personal subconscious. She went to a safe place.
The photographs.
The photographs, they represent happier, simpler, safer times. The past. Seth says, and this is a direct quote, he put himself back in time in order to separate himself from the sort of information that he heard himself giving earlier this evening.
That is just, it's heartbreakingly human. She was trying to distance herself from the scary, threatening present by literally hiding in the safe past.
It is, and it shows so clearly that a medium or a channel isn't a robot. They're not a machine. You can't just feed in a query and get a clean answer. The emotional state of the channel filters absolutely everything.
And the fact that she saw specific real photos proves she was still using her clairvoyance. It was misdirected.
It was directed inward for protection. It was a psychic defense mechanism.
So, Seth, being the teacher that he is, he immediately uses this as a teachable moment. He sort of gently scolds Robert for the timing, doesn't he?
Gently, but yes. He establishes a new protocol for their experiments right then and there.
The new rule being, no more tests before the real work is done.
Right. Seth says, I do not want any envelope tests given before the in-stream material is delivered.
And in-stream refers to the more structured experimental work they were doing with a psychologist, Dr. In-stream.
Correct. Seth explains that if Jane fails a test early in the night, she loses her confidence. She, he says, sets up defenses.
It creates performance anxiety, of course.
It does. It's like trying to take a final exam before you've even attended the lecture for the class. If you think you failed, you're just going to shut down for the rest of it.
So he wants the important high-level data to come through first, while the channel is open and confident and not worried about, getting the right answer on a quiz.
Exactly. Then, once the heavy lifting is done, you can do the parlor tricks with the envelopes.
It's trial and error. They are scientifically, methodically working out the best operating procedures for communicating with another dimension from their living room.
And Robert, to his credit, admits he just didn't think about it. He just thought he was being clever slipping the envelope in when he did.
Which brings us to the very end of the session, and honestly, it's my favorite part. The report card.
It is such a great moment of levity after all that intensity.
Seth, this ancient, wise, disembodied entity suddenly sounds like a school teacher letting the kids out for winter break.
It's so funny. He says, we are going to give you the week of Christmas off, for all students have a holiday sometime.
And then he adds the punchline. We may even give you a report card. Tonight's performance will not pull your average down too far.
I love that line. Won't pull your average down too far. It's so perfect. It acknowledges the failure of the envelope test, but it puts it in the larger context of, like, a semester grade.
Exactly. It's like, you flunked the pop quiz, but don't worry, you're still passing the class.
It's just so funny to think of Seth up there, wherever he is, keeping a grade book on Jane and Rob. But it serves a real purpose. It completely lightens the mood after all that heavy talk about cancer and the frustration of the failed test.
It restores the balance. It reminds them that this is a long-term learning process. It's not a single pass-fail event.
So what does this all mean then? If we zoom out from this one, a very strange evening.
I think the key takeaway from session 210 is the fragility of the human element in any kind of metaphysical work.
Say more about that. What do you mean by fragility?
Well, we often think of truth or psychic insight as this objective, pure beam of light that just sort of hits you. But this session shows that the receiver, Jane, is not a passive antenna. She affects the signal, her fear, her shock, her subconscious need for comfort. It all shapes and colors and sometimes completely blocks what comes through.
And the ethics of what you do with that signal, once you get it, are just as complex. Knowing the future isn't enough, not by a long shot. You have to know how that knowledge will affect the person who's receiving it.
Precisely. The decision to remain silent about the diagnosis, it wasn't a passive act. It was an active intervention. In this case, silence was the medicine.
That's a powerful lesson. Sometimes the most psychic thing you can do is just shut up and let hope do the work.
And maybe, if you're feeling overwhelmed, it's okay to retreat into a happy memory of a picnic table for a few minutes.
Just Maybe don't try to read a sealed envelope while you're there.
That is very good advice. This session, it really highlights why the Seth material is so enduring, I think. It's not just high-minded, abstract philosophy.
No, it's gritty. It's real-time problem solving. It's messy and human.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you found this deep dive interesting, if any of this resonated with you, you really, really owe it to yourself to go to the source.
Yes. We are just scratching the surface of session 210 here. There's so much more context and nuance in the full text.
We really encourage you to visit the New Awareness Network website. You can find their bookstore and all these volumes at sethcenter.com/the early sessions.
That's sethcenter.com/the early sessions. Getting the actual books, in this case, the early sessions. Book 5, it allows you to see the day-by-day progression of Jane and Robert's development. It's incredible to follow.
It really is a journey. And again, just a final reminder that this podcast is distributed free of charge for educational purposes. We want to honor the work of Jane Roberts and Robert Butts and just keep these ideas circulating.
Indeed. It's important work.
So, to leave you with something to think about, a final thought to mull over. We talked about those primaries. Talking is the primary of communication. Walking is the primary of motion.
Right.
If every single action we take is a kind of primary language of the universe, what are you saying with your actions right now?
That is a big question to end on.
Are you speaking the language of sitting or driving or maybe the primary of learning?
Or perhaps the primary of listening.
Or listening. Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the archives. We'll see you in the next session.
Take care.